For decades, the Arctic was a frozen backdrop to global politics. Quiet, predictable, almost forgotten, and then suddenly Greenland is back at the center of American power. Not because its people asked for it, not because Denmark offered it, but because a US president keeps saying out loud what most alliances assume will never be said, that even a NATO ally's territory can be negotiable. I want you to pause on that idea, because once a leader suggests that borders among allies are flexible, the entire post-war order starts to feel less solid. In Washington, members of Congress are scrambling not to advance a grand strategy, but to prevent a crisis that shouldn't exist in the first place. Bills are drafted, emergency meetings are held, allies are reassured, all because one option, once unthinkable, is now not off the table. If this kind of analysis helps you see power more clearly, stay with me. Because to understand why this moment matters, we have to step back. And that's where the real story begins. What's happening here is not a debate about real estate. It's a test of how power behaves when it meets resistance, especially from its own system. On one side, you have a president framing Greenland as a national security necessity. He speaks in absolutes: we need it. I'm not giving up options. In that framing, geography becomes leverage and allies become variables. On the other side, you have Congress acting in an unusual posture, not openly defiant, not confrontational, but quietly building guardrails. Meetings with Danish and Greenlandic officials, travel to Copenhagen, even legislation designed less to pass than to send a signal. Some lines still exist. And then there are the allies themselves. Denmark drawing clear red lines on territorial integrity, Greenland insisting that its future cannot be decided elsewhere, all while agreeing cautiously to keep talking. This is the core tension. Not escalation versus peace, but impulse versus institution. To understand why this standoff feels so destabilizing, we need to look at where it comes from. And that requires going back to see how we arrived here. You have to understand the cycle that power follows when it feels constrained. For decades after the Cold War, the United States treated alliances as fixed architecture. NATO borders were settled, sovereignty was assumed, security came from predictability. Greenland, though strategically located, existed comfortably inside that order. A Danish territory, a NATO space, a quiet constant, but over time something shifted. American power remained vast, yet its patience shrank. Global threats multiplied. China entered the Arctic conversation. Russia reasserted itself. And the idea took hold, especially in populist politics, that old arrangements were burdens, not assets. That's the historical mechanism at work. When a dominant power feels boxed in by rules it once wrote, it starts testing them. Not immediately with action, but with language, suggestions, options, hypotheticals. Trump's renewed focus on Greenland fits that pattern. It's not a sudden obsession. It's a symptom of a broader cycle where strategic anxiety meets personal authority. And once that cycle starts, history tells us something else usually follows. Then came the moment when rhetoric stopped sounding theoretical. In a single sentence, the president suggested that a U.S. military takeover of Greenland was not off the table, not as policy, not as a plan, but as a possibility. And in diplomacy, possibilities are pressure. That was the first real rupture. Because for Denmark, a NATO ally, this wasn't just provocative, it was destabilizing. Territorial integrity is not a bargaining chip inside an alliance. It's the foundation of trust. And suddenly that foundation was being publicly questioned. Inside Washington, the reaction was immediate but restrained. Senior Republicans, not known for dramatic gestures, called the idea absurd and strategic self-harm. Others pointed to public opinion, where support for such a move barely exists. Yet even then, notice what they didn't do. They didn't escalate. They tried to cool things down. That tells you how serious this felt. When leaders focus more on de-escalation than disagreement, it means the system senses danger. If you want to understand how fragile alliances really are, this is one of those moments worth paying attention to. Because after a rupture like this, the real forces move quietly beneath the surface, and that's when the true mechanics of this situation emerge. Hidden in plain sight, the threat isn't just about Greenland, it's about what happens when power tests its own alliances, when a nation's core relationships are subjected to the whims of a leader's decisions. Behind the scenes, lawmakers are trying to prevent a collapse that might never come, but they know that if this situation escalates, the consequences will ripple across NATO and beyond. It's not about who controls Greenland, it's about showing the world that U.S. alliances can be disregarded for the sake of short-term gains. The danger is in the erosion of trust. The high-level meetings between U.S., Danish, and Greenlandic officials represent a potential breakthrough, but also a warning. Diplomacy under stress often fails when the stakes feel too high. And still, even with the diplomatic channels open, the question remains, can trust truly survive this? Can relationships withstand these tests, or will the cracks become permanent? The answers may not be clear yet, but for every action in power politics, the consequences have long-term effects, and we're only just beginning to see the fallout from this latest chapter. So, what does this mean for the people on the ground? Let's dig into that next. At the heart of this crisis lies a simple yet often overlooked question. What does this mean for the people of Greenland and Denmark? To those in power, this may seem like a distant political maneuver, but for the people who live in Greenland, the conversation around sovereignty isn't an abstract debate. It's a lived reality, a reality where national decisions dictate not just borders, but their lives and their future. When Greenland's population hears that their land could be up for grabs in a transaction or military action they never asked for, it stirs up something much deeper than geopolitics. It taps into their right to self-determination, their need to be heard and respected in their own choices. For Denmark, too, the implications are profound. Its sovereignty is being questioned in ways it hasn't been for generations. This is not just about land, it's about a nation's dignity and its role in a shifting world order. This isn't just a political crisis, it's a human one. And it's one that could erode more than just borders. It could erode trust in the very system of alliances that have kept global peace for decades. It's a reminder that even in high-stakes political dramas, the human cost is the one that endures. But what happens when this tension grows too high? Let's turn to the global impact. The impact of this growing standoff extends far beyond the icy shores of Greenland. The ripple effect of this crisis is already being felt across the world, especially in the corridors of power in Europe and beyond. Denmark, as a NATO member, carries not just its own interests, but those of its European allies. If the US were to force a confrontation over Greenland, it would send a chilling message to all NATO countries: no territory, no alliance, no promise is truly secure. For Europe, this is more than a diplomatic squabble, it's a test of the very fabric of transatlantic unity. French President Macron warned of cascading consequences, reflecting the growing alarm that this could unravel the stability Europe has depended on for decades. If Greenland's sovereignty is undermined, how can any member of NATO feel safe in its relationship with the US? The global ramifications are also immediate. Allies in Asia, such as Japan and South Korea, are watching closely. They too rely on the stability of American partnerships and the credibility of its commitments. If the US can disregard a NATO ally in favor of territorial ambitions, what does that say about security guarantees? This is no longer just a conversation about one country or one territory. It's about the future of global security and the fundamental question of whether alliances, those often unseen threads that hold the world together, can withstand the test of aggressive unilateralism. So what comes next? Will this be a wake-up call for the future of NATO, or is this the beginning of a deeper shift in how the US interacts with the world? Let's consider three possible futures. The future of this situation can unfold in three distinct ways, each with its own consequences. Each pathway holds lessons, not just for Greenland or NATO, but for the global balance of power. Scenario 1. The best outcome. Diplomatic resolution. In this scenario, cooler heads prevail. Denmark, Greenland, and the United States manage to reach a compromise. The U.S. secures greater military presence in Greenland, enhancing its strategic position in the Arctic without stepping on Denmark's territorial integrity. NATO remains intact, the trust between allies is restored, and the system proves resilient, adaptable without cracking. This outcome rests on diplomacy and mutual respect. It relies on the understanding that some relationships are too precious to jeopardize, and that the future of global stability depends on upholding the integrity of alliances. It's an optimistic view of what diplomacy can still achieve in a world filled with volatility. Scenario 2. The middle path, tension and shifting alliances. In this scenario, the tensions subside, but not without cost. The U.S. pushes forward with some form of military presence in Greenland, but the price is high. Damaged relationships within NATO. Denmark and other European nations feel betrayed, but the need for cooperation on global issues like climate change and security in the Arctic forces a pragmatic, albeit uneasy, détente. This path represents a compromise, but one where trust has been tested and is now fragile. The U.S. may continue to lead the alliance, but with more caution and suspicion from its partners. The strategic balance in Europe and beyond is subtly altered, with other nations like China and Russia taking advantage of the cracks in NATO. Scenario 3, the worst outcome, unilateralism and unraveling alliances. In the most troubling scenario, the U.S. goes forward with an outright military or political seizure of Greenland. This action fractures NATO, with Denmark withdrawing from certain military commitments and possibly reconsidering its role in the alliance. The U.S. faces global condemnation, and the ripple effects reach far beyond the Arctic. China and Russia seize the opportunity to deepen their influence, making power plays in the regions that NATO once considered its own. The worst-case outcome here is a world where alliances fracture and international trust erodes. Countries reconsider their security arrangements, and the post-World War II order begins to unravel. The consequences for global stability would be profound, setting the stage for a new, more unpredictable era of geopolitical competition. These three scenarios outline the stakes. The future hinges on the decisions made now. Will the world witness the resilience of alliances or the fracturing of global trust? The path we take will determine not only the fate of Greenland, but the shape of the world to come. But as this saga unfolds, one thing is certain: the question of whether alliances can hold or whether they will crack will define the future of geopolitics. So, what does this mean for you? Are we watching the last stand of a global system built on trust, or is this the beginning of something entirely new? This is where we leave it for now, but the story doesn't end here. Stay tuned.